I loved him. And he was my dad's best friend. That feeling, the one I couldn't explain, still haunts me, even though I never wanted to admit it. He was my dad's best friend. 30 years older than me. This relationship, I knew, was wrong. I knew no one would understand. But every time he looked at me, every time his words echoed in the quiet of our evenings, I couldn't control my heart. It all started so simply, so normally. Every time he came over, I saw him as a grown man, someone who could tell interesting stories, someone who could warm up the room with his presence. He would usually just sit there, listening to my dad's stories, while I quietly sat beside them, saying nothing, just watching him. But then, there were moments, strange moments. The way he looked at me, the way he placed his hand on my shoulder, a light touch, almost like he was afraid to hurt me. But I couldn't pull away. "Can you get me a glass of water?" he asked. I nodded, not even sure why I agreed. I had no idea what was happening. The space between us seemed to shrink. He was close, too close. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know if I should pull away or lean in. When he looked back at me, I saw something different in his eyes. It wasn't the gaze of a friend. It wasn't the gaze of someone who had known me since childhood. It was the gaze of a man looking at a young woman in a way that I never expected. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop feeling this way. The moments came and went. And each time I would try to bury the emotions. But they kept resurfacing, every time he smiled, every time he touched me, every time his voice lingered in the air. I tried to pretend it didn't mean anything, but I knew it did. I knew I had to be careful. But how do you stop something you can't control? How do you stop the heart from racing when the person you're not supposed to love is the one you can't stop thinking about? That day, my dad was away on a business trip. He came over. Just the two of us. It wasn't the first time, but something was different that night. He said, "Let's have a drink, okay?" His voice was calm, steady, and there was something about the way he said it that made it impossible for me to say no. I nodded, and for some reason, I didn't hesitate. With a glass of wine in my hand, I could feel something in the air shift. It wasn't the alcohol. It was the closeness. The space between us seemed to narrow. Every sound, every breath, seemed so distant. He sat closer to me, and suddenly, the distance between us no longer existed. I didn't know what to do. The feeling was unsettling. Not because I didn't want it, but because I was afraid of it. He started talking about the trips he had taken, the memories from his younger years. But I wasn't really listening. All I could feel was the strange pull between us. That space, his eyes, his smile, his voice, it was all too much. Too close. And I couldn't pull away. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, almost concerned. I looked at him, and that's when I realized it. He wasn't just worried about me. He was worried about himself too. He knew what was happening between us, and yet, he couldn't stop it either. Maybe he didn't want to. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice faltering, unsure of whether I believed myself. When he stood up, I felt my heart tighten. It wasn't just him getting up. It was the silence that followed, the heaviness in the air. I felt abandoned, left alone in a space that had once been so comfortable. Now, it felt like a trap. When he turned back to me, I saw it. A look in his eyes that wasn't like before. It wasn't the look of a friend. It was the look of a man seeing something in me he hadn't seen before. How could I explain it? I couldn't say anything else. The confusion, the emotion swirling inside me, made it impossible for me to speak. All I could do was look at him, hoping that he would leave, that things would go back to normal. But I knew deep down that this was just the beginning. And I couldn't turn back now. When he left, I felt the door close. But I couldn't let go. I couldn't forget the look in his eyes. I knew that every time he appeared, I would feel it again. And I knew that I couldn't deny it anymore. Each time he came, I felt that same pull, that same desire. But why? Why was I allowing myself to fall deeper into this? I wasn't supposed to feel this way. But I did. And I didn't know what to do about it. He was never meant to be mine. But I couldn't let him go. The days that followed felt heavier than I could have imagined. The memory of his touch lingered in my mind, invading every thought. I'd tell myself that it was just a fleeting moment, a simple misunderstanding, but my heart betrayed me every time. His presence, his warmth, it was as if he left a piece of himself behind with me. And I couldn't shake it. It wasn't just the memory of his touch, but the way his eyes would follow mine, as if he saw something in me that I couldn't even see in myself. And it wasn't just the way he spoke to me, but the way he listened, as if I were the only person in the room. I had always admired him from afar, seeing him as my dad's best friend, the man who had been a constant presence in our lives. But now, I couldn't look at him the same way. And yet, every time I tried to distance myself from him, I found myself drawn back in. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper. Something I couldn't control. It started with small things. He'd stop by to visit, and I'd find myself making excuses to be in the same room as him. I'd linger in the kitchen, hoping he'd come in for a glass of water, or I'd sit on the porch, waiting for him to drive by. It wasn't obvious. I didn't want it to be obvious. But I felt it. The tension. The unspoken understanding between us. It was like a current, one that pulled me in, even as I tried to resist. One evening, as I sat on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against my skin, I heard the sound of his car approaching. My heart skipped a beat, even though I had no reason to feel this way. He pulled into the driveway, as casually as ever, but I could tell there was something different in his demeanor. Maybe it was the way he glanced at me as he stepped out of the car, or maybe it was the way his eyes lingered just a little too long. I tried to play it cool, to act as though nothing had changed. But inside, I was anything but calm. I could feel my pulse quicken as he approached me, his presence filling the space between us. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" he asked, his voice soft, but with an edge that I couldn't quite place. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Instead, I turned my gaze to the horizon, trying to focus on the sunset, trying to ignore the way his gaze burned into me. We stood there in silence for a while, the only sounds being the rustling of the leaves and the distant hum of the world going on outside our little bubble. But I knew that silence wasn't just empty space. It was filled with words we both refused to speak. I missed our talks," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. I didn't respond at first. What was I supposed to say? That I missed them too? That I longed for them in a way that felt wrong? But instead, I simply looked at him, my breath caught in my throat. "I missed them too," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air between us, thick with meaning. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against my arm as he reached for the chair beside me. He didn't say anything more, but his proximity was enough. His mere presence made the air around me feel charged, as though the atmosphere itself was aware of what was happening. I wanted to move away, to put distance between us, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. Every inch of me was drawn to him, like a moth to a flame, despite knowing the danger of it all. He was my dad's best friend. He was off limits. But in that moment, none of that mattered. "I don't want to make things awkward," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were talking to himself. "I don't think you've made anything awkward," I replied, my voice shaky. He paused, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I wondered if he could hear the unspoken truth in my words. Could he feel the same thing I felt? Or was I just fooling myself? But he didn't say anything more. Instead, he stood up, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned to leave. "I'll see you later," he said, and I nodded silently, watching as he walked back to his car. As I watched him drive away, I felt a rush of emotions hit me all at once. Was it possible to feel both relieved and disappointed in the same breath? I had wanted him to stay. I had wanted to reach out to him, to tell him everything that was swirling inside of me. But I couldn't. And I knew, deep down, that I shouldn't. But that feeling, that desire, was still there. I didn't know how long I could keep pretending that nothing was happening. That everything was normal. Because nothing felt normal anymore. The next day, I tried to go on with my routine, to forget about what had happened. But it was impossible. I found myself waiting for him to come back, for him to say something, to do something that would make this all make sense. But he didn't. And I realized then that I was the one who had to make the first move. But was I ready for that? Was I prepared for the consequences of crossing that line? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't go back. Not anymore. And so, the question hung over me, like a dark cloud threatening to burst. Would I be able to resist him, or would I finally give in to the temptation that had been building inside of me all along? I thought I could control it. But I was wrong. It was the little things that started to change, the subtle moments that I could no longer ignore. At first, everything felt like it was under control. I would see him, we'd share a quiet conversation, and I'd go back to my life. I could convince myself that it wasn't real, that nothing was truly happening. But the cracks in the facade began to show, slowly, one by one. The first time I noticed it was the way he started to act around me. At first, there had been that familiar warmth, the casual ease of a friendship that had spanned decades. But now, there was a tension I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't anger or frustration, but something more unsettling. It was as though he was trying to hold something back, as though he was afraid to do or say the wrong thing. I caught him watching me once, really watching me, when he thought I wasn't looking. I had turned my back for a moment to fetch something, and when I turned around, his gaze snapped away from me, like he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. That was the first time I really questioned what was happening between us. What was I missing? Why did he look at me like that? I wasn't sure if it was guilt, or if it was something else entirely. But whatever it was, it left me feeling more confused than ever. For days, I tried to put it out of my mind. I focused on other things, distracted myself with anything that could give me a sense of normalcy. But every time I walked past him, I felt it. That pulse, that charge in the air. It wasn't just the look in his eyes, it was the way his presence filled the space around me, as if everything else had faded into the background. And I hated myself for feeling this way. For wanting him. Things reached a boiling point when he invited me to dinner. It wasn't unusual for us to go out as a family, or for him to stop by for a meal. But this time, it was different. It was just the two of us. No one else. The invitation came casually, as if nothing had changed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a simple dinner. It felt like a test. The night came, and I was a bundle of nerves. I spent hours getting ready, overthinking every detail. What would I wear? How should I act? How would I keep my emotions in check? But no matter what I told myself, I couldn't stop the racing thoughts in my mind. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at the table, looking every bit the man I had always admired. The man who had been my father's best friend. The man who I was not supposed to want. "Have a seat," he said, his voice low but warm. I thought we could finally have some time to ourselves. I didn't know what to say. Was he aware of what was happening? Or was he as clueless as I was? Maybe he didn't even feel what I was feeling. Maybe it was all in my head. But as I sat down across from him, something inside me told me that it wasn't. Dinner was pleasant enough, polite conversation, small talk, the usual banter. But underneath it all, there was a heaviness. A palpable tension that neither of us could shake. Every time he leaned in a little closer to speak, every time his hand brushed mine as we reached for the wine glass, I could feel the pull. The distance between us grew smaller with each passing second, and I felt my heart racing again, like it had that first time. The quiet moments between us were the hardest. As the meal came to a close, the tension between us only deepened. I could feel it in the way he looked at me, in the way he lingered when he spoke. And when he reached across the table to touch my hand, just for a second, I knew. I knew that whatever was happening between us couldn't be ignored anymore. "I've been thinking about something," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. He paused for a moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I don't know how to say this," he began, then stopped himself. He looked away, his expression hardening, and I could tell that whatever he was about to say wasn't something he had planned on sharing. But it didn't matter. I could feel the truth creeping in. It wasn't the words he was going to say, it was the weight of everything unsaid, everything hidden between us. "I'm not sure if we should keep doing this," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Doing what?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Spending time together like this. It's not right." He stopped, clearly trying to find the right words. "I don't know how to explain it. But something has changed, and I don't think I can pretend it hasn't." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. What did that mean? What was he trying to tell me? Was he feeling the same pull I was? Or was he just trying to push me away? Before I could respond, he stood up abruptly. "I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while," he said, his tone firm but distant. I sat frozen, the weight of his words crashing down on me. I had known it was coming, but I hadn't been prepared for it. He was distancing himself from me, but I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just me he was pulling away from. He was pulling away from everything we'd shared, from everything we had almost become. I didn't speak. I couldn't. What was there to say? As I walked out of his house that night, the cold air outside hit me like a slap in the face. The world felt different. He had just confirmed what I had known deep inside. But now I was left with more questions than answers. What did he mean by that? Why had he invited me in the first place? Why had he allowed us to get so close? What were we really doing? I couldn't stop the whirlwind inside me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. I thought I was in control. I was wrong. I couldn't get his words out of my head. "I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while." The way he said it, the finality in his voice, it was like a door slamming shut, trapping me inside a cage of confusion and desire. I tried to tell myself that it was for the best, that I needed to move on, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready to let go. And I knew, deep down, he wasn't either. The days that followed were filled with silence. He avoided me. We passed each other in the hallway, exchanged polite, distant pleasantries, but there was an unspoken distance between us, one that grew larger with each passing day. It was almost like he was a stranger. But every time I saw him, every time his eyes flickered to mine for just a second too long, I knew. He was still there, and so was I. We just couldn't admit it. Not yet. I tried to fill the void. I stayed busy. I buried myself in work, in distractions, in everything that would keep my mind off of him. But he was everywhere. In the way the house felt empty when he wasn't around. In the way my heart would race whenever I saw his car pull into the driveway, even though I knew he wasn't coming to see me. I could feel myself spiraling, trapped in this cycle of wanting him and knowing I couldn't have him. I told myself it was wrong, that it was just a phase, that I would get over it. But the more I tried to push him away, the more I felt the pull. It wasn't just physical. It was deeper than that. It was emotional, psychological. I couldn't ignore what was happening between us. I couldn't ignore the way my body reacted to him. But I also couldn't ignore the guilt. The crushing guilt that weighed on me every time I thought about what I was doing. He was my father's best friend. I should never have felt this way. It wasn't just the age gap, it was the betrayal, the moral lines I was crossing, the chaos I was creating in my own life. But when I looked at him, when he looked at me, all of that faded away. The guilt didn't matter anymore. And then one day, he showed up at the door. It was late. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when I heard the knock. My heart leaped in my chest. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer, unsure if I was ready for what this visit might mean. But I did. And there he was, standing on the other side, his eyes looking both familiar and foreign. "I needed to talk," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. I stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him in. He didn't sit right away, instead standing there, looking around the room as if searching for something. Maybe answers. Maybe a way to undo what had already been done. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his hair, looking conflicted, almost as if he was struggling to say what he had come to say. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he admitted. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that nothing happened." The air between us thickened. I knew what he meant. I had felt it too, the weight of the unspoken words, the truth that had been hanging over us since that night. But I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? How could I explain what had been going on in my mind? How could I explain this pull, this attraction, that seemed impossible to ignore? He finally sat down, his eyes never leaving mine. The intensity of his gaze made my stomach flip, made my breath catch in my throat. I had to fight to steady myself. But it was hard. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, as if the apology could somehow make everything go away. "I shouldn't have put you in this position. I shouldn't have let it go this far." The words hit me like a wave, crashing over me, drowning me in emotion. He was sorry. But it wasn't enough. It never would be enough. Because I wasn't sorry. I wasn't sorry for feeling what I felt. I wasn't sorry for wanting him. And that scared me more than anything. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. What could I say? That I was falling for him? That I couldn't help myself? That the more I tried to push him away, the stronger my feelings became? How could I say that to him? "I don't know how to fix this," he said, almost to himself. "But I think we need to stop pretending." He was right. We had been pretending for far too long. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to face the consequences of stopping. Would it be enough to just walk away? Could I walk away from him? Could I walk away from this? And just as quickly as he had come, he stood up to leave. "I think we should both take a step back. It's for the best," he said, his voice heavier now, like a man who had just realized the depth of the hole he had dug for himself. I watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him. And just like that, I was alone again. But as I sat in the silence that followed, I realized that it didn't matter. I couldn't escape it. He had left, but a part of him was still with me. The truth was, we could both try to walk away, but we'd never be able to outrun what had already been set in motion. I just didn't know how much longer I could pretend that it was all going to be okay. We both knew it was too late. But the truth is, we never wanted to stop. Days turned into weeks. The silence between us stretched on, but it was far from peaceful. The space he left behind was like a void, one that I couldn't fill with anything else. His absence was louder than any of the words we could have said to each other. I still saw him every day, brief encounters in the hallway, the occasional nod when we passed by each other in the kitchen. But nothing was the same. The weight of everything we had almost shared hung heavily in the air. But despite the distance, despite the walls we were building around ourselves, the tension was still there. The unspoken truth lingered in every glance, every hesitation. I could feel him, like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. I couldn't escape him. And I didn't know if I even wanted to. It was the night of my father's birthday party when everything finally cracked open. The house was filled with laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses, the sounds of old friends reunited. It was supposed to be a celebration, but for me, it was a battlefield. The entire evening felt like a carefully crafted mask, everyone playing their part, pretending nothing had changed, pretending that I hadn't been caught in a web of emotions I couldn't untangle. He was there, of course. He had to be. My father's best friend, always present for these occasions. But I couldn't focus on anyone else. All I could think about was him. The way he looked at me from across the room, his eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The way he would look away quickly when our gazes met, as if we both knew something we couldn't say aloud. I tried to ignore it. I tried to enjoy the evening, to be the dutiful daughter, to laugh and joke with friends. But it was impossible. The night felt suffocating. And I felt the pull again, stronger than ever. As the party began to wind down, my father was deep in conversation with some old colleagues, leaving me to entertain a few guests. But all I could think about was slipping away. Just for a moment. I needed to escape the noise, the pressure. So, I stepped outside, into the cool night air, hoping for a few moments of solitude. And then, just as I was about to take a deep breath, I heard his voice. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, careful, as though he was testing the waters. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. He was standing there, just a few steps away, watching me. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made me feel both exposed and alive. "I'm fine," I said, the words coming out too quickly, too sharp. I could hear the lie in my own voice, and I hated myself for it. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. It was as if the entire world had stopped, and we were the only two people left in it. Finally, he took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can pretend that nothing is happening between us." His words hit me like a tidal wave. Everything I had been trying to deny, everything I had buried deep inside me, came rushing to the surface. It wasn't just him. It was me, too. I had tried to convince myself that it wasn't real, that we could walk away from each other, but the truth was, there was no walking away. Not for either of us. "I don't want to pretend anymore," I whispered, my voice breaking. He was standing so close now that I could feel the heat of his body, and for a moment, I thought I might explode from the tension between us. There was no more hiding. There was no more pretending. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached up and touched his face. Just for a second. It wasn't a gesture of control. It wasn't a demand. It was just the truth. I needed to feel the reality of what was happening, the reality that we were no longer just two people caught in a situation, we were two people who had crossed a line, and there was no going back. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand moved to mine, his fingers curling around mine, pulling me closer. The moment hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything we had kept buried. "I don't know what this means," he said, his voice rough, almost like a confession. I didn't know what it meant either. I couldn't explain it. But I didn't need to. The truth was already there between us. In the way his lips hovered just above mine, in the way our breaths mingled in the cool night air. We were at the edge, teetering on the brink of something we couldn't control. And for a moment, I didn't want to control it. But then, just as quickly as it had come, he stepped back, breaking the spell between us. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I saw something: regret? Fear? But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I stood there, frozen, watching him as he turned and walked back into the house. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left standing in the cold, feeling more alone than I ever had before. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. The truth is always harder to face when it's staring you in the face. After that night, things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. The moment he walked away from me, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I wanted to chase him, to call out his name, to tell him that I couldn't stand being without him. But I didn't. I stood there in the cold, the words stuck in my throat, my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if the distance between us had grown even more. He was back to being the man I could never have, and I was left with nothing but the hollow ache of knowing that we had crossed a line we couldn't erase. The silence that followed was suffocating. We exchanged small, distant pleasantries when we crossed paths in the house, but everything else was gone. The connection we had once shared, the understanding that seemed to transcend everything else, was now tainted. Broken. And then came the night I could no longer ignore the truth. The night it all came crashing down. I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep running from the reality that had unfolded between us. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, but I knew I couldn't let it end like this, not without understanding what had happened, not without confronting it. I couldn't stand to see him every day, to feel the unspoken tension hanging between us. He was there, so close, but so far away. It felt like a cruel joke, like I was stuck in a game where the rules kept changing, and I didn't know how to play anymore. But I had to face it, I had to know. I waited for my father to leave for his weekly golf game. It was the only time I knew I would have some privacy, the only time I could speak to him without anyone else around. Without anyone to overhear. The moment my father was gone, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to talk to him. To really talk to him. I found him in the study, sitting behind the desk, flipping through a few papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. I almost turned around and walked out. I almost chickened out. But then I heard him mutter under his breath, almost like he was speaking to himself. Why did this happen? The words were so quiet, but they hit me like a punch. It was as if he was asking the very question that had been tormenting me. Why? Why had we done this? Why couldn't we stop? Why had we crossed that line? Before I could stop myself, I was standing in front of him. I need to know, I said, my voice trembling. I need to know what this was. What we are. What's happening? He looked up at me, his eyes weary, tired, as if he had been carrying this burden alone for too long. There was guilt in his eyes, but there was something else there too, regret, yes, but also something deeper, something darker. I don't know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know anymore. We stood there in silence for a long moment, both of us struggling to find the words that would make sense of everything that had happened. But nothing made sense. How could it? How could anything make sense when you're falling in love with someone you shouldn't, when you're breaking the most sacred of rules and pretending it doesn't matter? I never meant for any of this to happen, he said, his voice cracking. I never meant to hurt you. You haven't hurt me, I replied, though I wasn't sure if it was the truth. Not really. It's just, this feeling. I don't know what to do with it. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine as if he was looking for an answer, as if he was hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could fix this. But I couldn't. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't even know if I wanted to. I can't keep pretending, he said, his voice firm now, though the pain in it was palpable. I can't pretend that nothing's happened. That we're still the same, that we can just go back to the way things were. My heart sank. I didn't want to hear those words, but I knew they were coming. I had been expecting them, but now that they were here, I couldn't bear it. He was right, of course. We couldn't go back. Not after everything. We can't, I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. But I don't know what to do now. There it was. The truth we had both been avoiding. We couldn't go back. The moment we crossed that line, we broke something between us. Something that could never be repaired. Not by words, not by apologies. Nothing could undo what we had done. I think it's time for us to let go, he said, his voice soft, almost as if he was saying it for both of us, as if he knew that it was the only way forward. But I couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when it felt like the world was crashing down around me, when every part of me screamed to hold on, to fight for something that was already lost. I don't want to let go, I whispered. But I know I have to. The silence stretched between us again, this time heavier than before. We both knew it was over. We both knew that the feelings we had for each other were too dangerous, too destructive to continue. But that didn't make it any easier. It didn't make the ache in my chest any less raw. As I turned to leave, I couldn't bring myself to look back. I couldn't face him any longer. I couldn't face what we had become. But as I walked out of the room, I heard him say one last thing. "I'm sorry." And I didn't know how to answer. Because in that moment, I wasn't sure if I was sorry, too. Or if I ever would be. Sometimes, the hardest part is letting go. Even when you know it's the only way. It's strange how you can be surrounded by people and yet feel utterly alone. It had only been a few days since that conversation with him, but already, it felt like a lifetime. The house was filled with the usual noise, my dad's laughter, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the TV in the background, but none of it reached me. None of it felt real. I went through the motions of everyday life, but each step felt heavier than the last. I couldn't stop thinking about him. His words, his touch, the way he looked at me, it all replayed in my mind like a never-ending loop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, and every time I opened them, I was reminded that he was gone. The worst part was the emptiness. It wasn't just the absence of him in the house, it was the absence of me. Of who I was before all of this. I couldn't recognize the person I had become. I couldn't recognize the girl who had once believed in clear boundaries, in black and white. The lines between right and wrong had blurred, and now I was trapped somewhere in between, unable to move forward, yet unable to turn back. I told myself that I was fine. I told myself that I could handle it. That it was just a moment of weakness, that it was just a fleeting emotion that would fade with time. But I knew deep down that it wouldn't. It couldn't. Because nothing that powerful ever fades quietly. It stays with you. It burns, smolders, and changes you in ways you can't control. Days turned into weeks, and things between us remained distant, awkward, almost cold. Whenever I saw him, I forced myself to look away, to pretend that I didn't feel the weight of his gaze on me. But I couldn't fool myself. I could see it in his eyes, the same struggle, the same pain. We were both living in a world where the rules no longer applied, where every glance felt like a betrayal, every word like a lie. I tried to move on. I tried to immerse myself in things that would distract me, work, friends, anything to keep my mind off of him. But nothing worked. I could feel him, lurking in the corners of my mind, pulling me back every time I tried to break free. Then came the night it all broke. It wasn't a grand gesture, not like the romantic encounters you see in movies. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was just a quiet, desperate conversation, the kind that happens when you've reached your breaking point. He came to me, just as he had all those nights before, but this time, there was no hesitation in his voice. No pretending. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of everything unsaid. "I can't pretend like we're okay. We're not okay." I stood there, frozen. The words stung more than I had expected. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to tell him that I couldn't live without him. But instead, I just nodded. Because deep down, I knew he was right. We couldn't go on like this. "Are you saying you want to end it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his eyes filled with a kind of sadness I couldn't bear to look at. "I don't want to hurt you. But I think we both need to let go. For good." I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream that I wasn't ready, that I couldn't let go of the one thing that had made me feel alive again. But I couldn't. The truth was, I knew it was over. I knew that this was the end, even if my heart refused to accept it. "I'll always care about you," he said, his voice shaking. "But we've crossed a line. And we can't uncross it." He stepped back, his words hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. I wanted to say something, anything to stop him. But I couldn't. All I could do was watch as he walked away, his silhouette fading into the hallway. The door closed softly behind him, and just like that, everything between us was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sank to the floor, my hands trembling as the weight of it all settled in. He was right. We couldn't keep doing this. But that didn't make it any easier. It didn't make the pain go away. I had lost him. And I had lost myself in the process. But the hardest part wasn't walking away. It was knowing that, deep down, I would always love him. Even if we could never be together. Even if I knew it was wrong. I loved him. And that was the one thing I couldn't let go of. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the overwhelming ache of everything that had happened. Maybe it was hours. Maybe it was only minutes. But when I finally stood up, I knew that I had to leave it behind. I had to let go. Even if it broke me. Because sometimes, the hardest part is not the falling. It's the getting up again. We always think we can go back, but once we've crossed the line, there's no going back. I thought the hardest part was letting go. I thought that once the words were spoken, once the door was closed behind him, that the pain would begin to ease. That I could start healing. But no one tells you that the real weight of something like this doesn't hit until after it's over. The silence. The emptiness. The realization that what you thought you knew about yourself, about your own boundaries, was a lie. It was easier to pretend in the beginning. Easier to tell myself that I could move on. But I couldn't. Not when everything about my life had shifted, not when the memories of him still lingered like a shadow, always hovering just out of reach. The house was quieter than it had ever been. My father, oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded just under his roof, went about his life as if nothing had changed. I would force myself to smile, to play the role of the dutiful daughter. But I was breaking inside. Each day felt like I was drowning in the weight of my own silence. I was alone in this. Alone in a way that no one could understand. It wasn't just the absence of him that hurt, it was the fact that we had both chosen silence over honesty. We had chosen to keep this secret buried deep, as if pretending it never happened could somehow make it all go away. But it didn't. The truth was still there, sitting in the pit of my stomach, and every time I looked at my father, I saw the man who had been my world, and the man who had torn it all apart. It wasn't just guilt that haunted me. It was regret. Regret for not stopping when I should have. Regret for crossing that line when I knew, deep down, that I would never be able to walk away from him once I had. And now, here I was, stuck in the consequences of my own choices, too scared to speak up, too scared to ask for help. One night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, and I barely recognized the person looking back at me. The girl who once had everything figured out, who knew where her boundaries lay, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone broken, lost, confused. I didn't know how to fix myself. I didn't know how to move forward when everything inside me was screaming to turn back. I tried to go on with my life, tried to pretend I was fine. But everywhere I went, I was reminded of him. The way his voice echoed in my mind, the way his touch lingered on my skin, the way he had looked at me with so much intensity, so much need. It was always there, pulling me back, even though I knew I shouldn't go. Even though I knew that it was over, that I couldn't have him. And then, one evening, it happened. He came back. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't ready for it. But there he was, standing at the door, looking as if he hadn't aged a day since the last time I saw him. He looked almost the same, but there was something different in his eyes. Something darker. Something regretful. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say, unsure of what I was supposed to feel. My heart raced in my chest, betraying the calm facade I was trying to hold up. I had to see you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't leave it like this. I couldn't let you go without explaining. His words hit me like a punch. He didn't owe me an explanation. He didn't owe me anything. But I couldn't stop myself from wanting to hear him. To hear the words that might finally give me the closure I so desperately needed. You don't owe me anything, I replied, though my voice wavered. You've already done enough. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I can't live with the guilt. Not anymore. I should have never let it get this far. I should have stopped before we both lost everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The air between us was charged, thick with unspoken words, with feelings we had never allowed ourselves to voice. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was look at him. "You're right," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "We lost everything. But the truth is, we never had it to begin with. We were living in a lie. And I can't keep living that way." He stepped closer, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words raw, unpracticed. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But I was selfish." For the first time, I saw him. Not as the man who had been my father's best friend, not as the man I had loved, but as a man who had made mistakes. Just like me. Just like everyone else. "I know," I said softly, pulling my hand away. "But we have to let it go. We have to move on." "I don't know how," he admitted, his eyes filled with a pain I couldn't erase. "I don't know how to walk away from you." I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to walk away from him either. But I knew I had to. And so, we stood there in the silence, both of us caught between the past and the future, both of us struggling to let go of something that was never meant to be. I knew that I couldn't change what had happened, and neither could he. But I also knew that I couldn't stay in this place forever. I had to move forward. Even if it meant walking away from everything I thought I knew. The price of silence was too great. And now, I had to pay it. I've lived with this for so long, and I can't hold it in anymore. This is my truth. And I'm telling you now, because maybe, just maybe, you'll understand. It's strange, you know? The way things unfold in life. How moments, fleeting and insignificant at the time, shape everything you are. How one decision, one look, one touch, can change the course of your entire existence. I never thought this would be my story. I never thought I would be here, telling you this. But here I am. And I have no choice now but to let it out. Because it's been eating me alive. The guilt, the confusion, the longing, all of it swirling inside me, making it impossible to breathe. I'm not proud of everything that's happened. How could I be? How could anyone be proud of something so twisted, so wrong? But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm not here to justify what I did. Because there is no justification. There's just the truth. The raw, painful truth. I loved him. I loved the man who was supposed to be a father figure. The man who was my dad's best friend. And maybe it was wrong, maybe it was selfish, but that doesn't change the fact that it was real. That's the hardest part. The truth of it. The reality that what we had was not just a mistake, it was a feeling, one that neither of us could control, no matter how much we tried. I wish I could say I regret it. I wish I could tell you that I would take it all back, that I would erase every moment, every look, every touch. But I can't. Because no matter how much pain it caused, no matter how many people I hurt, it was real. And I have to live with that. I think what hurts the most is that I'll never be able to go back to who I was before. The person who thought everything was black and white. The person who thought she had everything figured out. That person is gone. And maybe that's the hardest part, to realize that, for all the love and heartbreak, I can never go back. I can never unsee what I've seen, unfeel what I've felt. But that's the price, isn't it? The price of silence. The price of pretending everything is okay when you know deep down that it's not. I've lived in that silence for so long, carrying the weight of it every single day, and I can't do it anymore. I'm telling you this because I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want to pretend like it didn't happen. I don't want to be the person who's afraid of their own truth. I've spent too much time burying it, hoping it would go away. But it hasn't. It won't. So, here I am. Finally facing it. Finally letting it go. And to you, the one who's been listening, I want to say thank you. Thank you for hearing me out, for not judging me for the things I've done, for the things I've said. Because the truth is, we all have our own secrets, our own demons. And we all have to carry them in our own way. If you're still with me, still listening, then I ask this of you: don't look at me with pity. Don't look at me with judgment. Because I'm not asking for either. I'm asking for understanding. For grace. For the same thing I'm still trying to find in myself. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see that we're all just human. All of us. Struggling, making mistakes, trying to figure it out. I want to thank you, again, for sticking with me through this. For understanding that some stories are messy, some stories are broken, but they're still worth telling. And I hope, if nothing else, that my story has made you think. Made you reflect on your own life, your own choices. There's more to come, of course. More stories. More lessons. More truths that are waiting to be shared. So, if you feel like it, if you're still curious, stick around. There's so much more to explore. More to uncover. And, just maybe, we'll find our way through this mess together. Thank you. And take care. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, share your story, or just let me know what you think. If you found something in this video that resonates, hit that like button and subscribe for more. I promise, there's a lot more where that came from.